New York, a crisp winter morning. On the 48th floor of Sterling & Company, a financial conglomerate in the heart of Manhattan, glass walls stretched into the sky, gleaming in the cold light. Black suits and silver ties moved down the corridors like a cold current of power. Here, every number was colossal, every decision capable of shifting entire markets. Today, that atmosphere was even more tense. In the CEO's office, Richard Sterling, a man seasoned with $100 million deals, paced back and forth, phone pressed tight against his ear. His voice trembled, full of fury and desperation. My God, how could this happen now? Below, through the giant pane of glass, he saw the sleek black motorcade of their Japanese partners pulling up to the entrance. The most important clients of the year had arrived. Only 15 minutes until they would walk into the conference room. A contract worth $300 million. But $300 million was more than a figure. It was survival, prestige, the future of Sterling & Company. And yet, at the last minute, the official interpreter had called to cancel. A family emergency. No replacement available. Inside the room, silence hung thick as ice. Assistants stood frozen, eyes darting nervously at one another. Rebecca, head of administration, whispered, nearly choking on her words, "Sir, I've called every agency in the city, but no one is willing to take such urgent notice. For a meeting this important, we can't use software translation. The Japanese will see it as disrespect." Richard tore off his tie, sweat forming on his brow. 20 years of building Sterling & Co., and now everything could collapse because of a language barrier. 14 minutes. 13 minutes. The ticking of the clock struck like hammer blows. And then, from a corner of the room, a small voice spoke up. Gentle, almost fearful, but precise. "Excuse me, I can help." All eyes turned toward the speaker. It was Aaliyah Carter, a young black woman, just 26, in a faded blue janitor's uniform, holding a rag and a bottle of glass cleaner. For 3 years, Aaliyah had been nearly invisible here. Day after day, silently pushing her cleaning cart, wiping dark oak tables, dusting leather chairs, changing the water in vases. Almost no one knew her name. To most employees, she was just a shadow passing through their busy mornings. And yet today, that shadow had stepped forward, uttering words that froze the entire room. I can speak Japanese." Silence, a breathless pause. Then a brittle laugh cracked the air. Victoria Hayes, Director of External Relations, blonde hair perfectly curled, heels tapping against the floor, sneered. "You speak Japanese? Don't be ridiculous. Black girls like you are only fit for scrubbing floors." A few others covered their mouths, stifling laughter. Under the harsh white light of the boardroom, her words cut like a cold knife, slicing through the already taut air. Aaliyah remained where she was. Her face was strangely calm, as if she had heard such words 1,000 times before. Her dark eyes held something indefinable. Not anger, not fear, but a silence weighted with power. Richard halted, staring at her. In the weary eyes of the CEO, a fragile spark of hope flickered. His voice was tight. You can really speak Japanese?" Aaliyah nodded gently. Her tone was steady, unshaken. "Yes. I studied East Asian languages at Columbia University. I know Japanese, and some Mandarin as well." Rebecca scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "Columbia? A black janitor here, claiming she went to Columbia? What a joke. Another knife." Aaliyah did not answer. She stood still, rag in hand, as if ready to return to cleaning the moment she was dismissed. But her gaze did not lower. Richard hesitated. Time was slipping away. The Japanese delegation was already in the elevator. 10 minutes. He drew a deep breath, turning to her. "All right, prove it. Greet them with a formal phrase in Japanese, exactly as you would if they walked in now." The room fell silent. No more laughter, no more taunts, only a waiting void where the fate of a young woman and a $300 million deal hung in balance. Aaliyah inhaled deeply. Then she spoke. Her voice flowed smoothly, precisely, every syllable like water over stone. はじめましてめ、ここでお会いできて光栄です。あちらたちの協力が双方にとって有義であることを願っています。Her Japanese rang so flawless, so natural, that the room was left stunned. Richard, though he didn't understand the meaning, recognized the cadence, the fluency, the conviction in each sound. He whispered, "What? What did you just say?" Aaliyah replied softly, "It was a formal greeting. It is an honor to meet you here. I hope our cooperation will be of benefit to both sides." In that instant, the air shifted. No one dared to laugh, but into the shocked silence, Victoria's lips curled again, releasing words colder than ice. Nice pronunciation, but don't forget, Polish coal as much as you want. It's still just coal. Her cruelty reverberated through the room, heavy as a whip crack. And thus began an unforeseen confrontation between an invisible black janitor and the arrogant machinery of Sterling and Co. The glass doors of the boardroom swung open. Cold air from the hallway rushed in, carrying with it the steady sound of shoes, the Japanese delegation approaching. The motorcade had already left the front entrance, and now 5 men in dark suits, ties knotted tight, faces calm and composed, entered the room in unison. The directors all stood, bowing in greeting. Richard Sterling stepped forward to welcome them, his face taut, though his smile was carefully rehearsed. He shook each guest's hand, pronouncing their names with formal American English. Meanwhile, Aaliyah lingered at the back of the room. She hadn't even had time to put the glass cleaner back into her cart. The rag was still in her hand. The faded blue of her uniform looked like a stray ink stain against the polished brilliance of the boardroom. Victoria's eyes immediately cut toward her, cold and sharp. The 40-year-old white woman, her blonde hair tied neatly back, strode over quickly, lowering her voice, though loud enough for many to hear. "What are you still doing here? Finish cleaning and get out. This is a negotiation table, not a storage closet." A few executives smirked. Whispered chuckles rippled through the room, quiet but piercing enough for Aaliyah to feel them. Her heart thudded. She wanted to slip away, to vanish down the corridor where no one would notice her. But then Richard's voice broke through. "Wait, Victoria, she's staying." The room froze. Victoria spun around, blue eyes wide. "What did you just say? A black janitor at a $300 million negotiation table? Mr. Sterling, have you lost your mind?" Richard did not answer. He nodded, signaling Aaliyah forward. The 5 Japanese guests had already taken their seats, their eyes sliding toward her with barely concealed surprise. Her footsteps fell softly against the wooden floor. Each step echoed with the pounding of her heart. She pulled a chair, sat at the edge of the table, and forced herself to sit upright. Her hands gripped a small notebook, not the elegant kind executives used, but the same worn pad she used to jot down cleaning schedules. The delegation's leader, Mr. Takahashi, studied her closely. His voice in Japanese was low and steady. "You are the interpreter today." Every gaze in the room landed on Aaliyah. Again, silence stretched thick, like a pane of glass between them. She drew a deep breath, offered a small smile, and replied in Japanese, precise and deliberate. "Yes, sir. I am honored to be here today, and I hope this meeting will bring fruitful cooperation for both sides." The tone was flawless, the honorifics precise. A brief light flickered in Mr. Takahashi's eyes. He nodded, smiling faintly. "Good." Richard exhaled in relief, as though someone had pulled him back from the edge of a cliff. But the moment was instantly shattered. Victoria burst into laughter, high, hollow. "It sounds nice, but funny thing, gentlemen, just 3 years ago she was scrubbing toilets here. And now Sterling and Co. has invited her to sit at the table with you." The room stiffened. The polite smiles of the Japanese guests faltered. They exchanged glances, then looked toward Richard. In their culture, hierarchy and face were sacred in formal meetings. Allowing a janitor to sit at the negotiation table, worse, to have that fact spoken aloud, was an unthinkable insult. Richard frowned, raising a hand to stop Victoria, but it was already too late. Aaliyah sat frozen. Her ears rang, her heartbeat thundered like war drums. Each word, scrubbing toilets, cut into her like a blade. She felt every stare upon her. Surprise, doubt, pity, from the men across the table. And in that moment, memory crashed over her. An afternoon years ago at Columbia. She had begged a professor to defer her exam because her mother was in the hospital. He had looked her up and down and said coldly, "Poor black girls like you always end up serving. Walk away." That day, Aaliyah had quietly left the university, clutching a cheap suitcase, her shattered dreams falling like glass around her. And now those old words resurfaced, twined with Victoria's mockery. Richard quickly interjected, speaking in English to the guests. "Please, do not misunderstand. Sterling & Copey values talent at every level. Ms. Carter is here because of her exceptional linguistic ability." Mr. Takahashi gave a polite nod, though his eyes had already shifted. He said nothing more, gestured for the meeting to proceed. The negotiations began. Aaliyah translated each sentence, each nuance, without a single misstep. Her composure was so steady that Richard found himself astonished. How could someone humiliated before the entire table remain this calm? But inside her chest, each heartbeat was a spark. When the Japanese guests asked about contract terms, she conveyed them fluently. When they raised concerns, she translated with respectful nuance. Even when one guest slipped in an old-fashioned Japanese pun, she deftly rendered it into English humor, making the whole table laugh. There were moments when Richard looked at Aaliyah and thought, "She's not just translating, she's saving this company." But then Victoria intruded again. Leaning forward with a sly smile, she turned to the guests. "Perhaps you find this amusing too. A black woman, just yesterday pushing a janitor's cart down this hall, now sitting here. That's America for you. Every dream is possible." Dry laughter followed, this time from a few middle managers at the back. Aaliyah felt blood rush to her face. Each black woman spat from Victoria's mouth cracked like a whip across her memories. Customers ignoring her, guards eyeing her with suspicion, moments she had to shrink back simply because of her skin. She bowed her head slightly, drew in a breath. Her eyes closed for a beat, then opened sharp and clear. She translated the following question from the Japanese delegation, her voice so calm that no one could guess the storm inside. The guests nodded. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere shifted, becoming heavy and precarious. As the final translation ended, Mr. Takahashi spoke to her in Japanese, slow and grave. "You are very skilled, but why do they treat you this way?" Aaliyah faltered. The question pierced the deepest part of her pain. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she smiled faintly, replying softly in Japanese. "Life places us in positions where people think we must remain still. But sometimes, from those very positions, we see the truth more clearly than anyone else." Mr. Takahashi held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. The meeting concluded with only a memorandum of understanding, not a finalized contract. The delegation departed politely, but without the warmth they had shown at the beginning. Richard sighed, knowing some of the opportunity had slipped away. At the end of the table, Victoria gathered her papers, lips curling in a triumphant smile. She leaned close to Aaliyah, whispering just loud enough for several to hear. "You may know a lot, but in the end, to them, you're still just a black janitor. Never forget that." Aaliyah sat still, her hand resting on the small notebook. No retort, no protest. But for the first time, her eyes glimmered with something new. No longer the familiar endurance, but a cold, unwavering resolve. For in that moment of deepest humiliation, she knew this would not go on forever. And from that silence, a battle was beginning, one that would strip Sterling and Combs bare and turn Victoria's contempt into the very knife that cut herself. The boardroom slowly emptied. The sound of heels, scraping chairs, and polite farewells faded into the carpeted hallway. Only Aaliyah remained, sitting quietly at the edge of the long walnut table, gripping her small notebook so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could hear her heartbeat pounding like distant drums from a long-ago parade, drums of memory. The image in her mind was not Manhattan's glittering skyline beyond the glass, nor Victoria's cold stare. Instead, she saw the damp corridors of an old dormitory at Columbia University. She had been just 20 then, brimming with dreams and eagerness. In her hand, a student ID, on her desk, textbooks on Japanese and Mandarin, pages filled with rows upon rows of Han characters. Aaliyah had once been one of the best students in her class. She could read ancient Japanese poetry and could write calligraphy in firm, flowing strokes. Professor Yamamoto used to say, "You have a rare ear, Aaliyah. You hear and feel intonation like a native." She had believed her future was wide open, a place in an international organization perhaps, becoming a bridge between cultures. But it all collapsed after one summer. Her mother, Aaliyah Carter, a nurse of 30 years, collapsed from diabetes complications. Her modest wages could not cover the hospital bills. Aaliyah was forced to abandon her third semester and find work immediately to save her mother's life. She vividly remembered her final meeting with the department chair. She had cried, begging to defer tuition, to receive aid. He had looked her over slowly, then shaken his head. "Ms. Carter, we have to be realistic. Students like you, usually they don't last. Consider taking on a service job to support your family. Don't waste any more time." Those words fell like lead in her heart. And indeed, the next week, Aaliyah stood in a faded blue uniform at Sterling and Combs, hired as a janitor. From an academic dream, she had plunged to the bottom, wiping tables, scrubbing floors, hauling trash. The early days at Sterling were mornings of humiliation. Once, while cleaning the employee dining room, I saw two men in suits eating and talking. They didn't lower their voices, as though her presence wasn't worth noticing. One said, "This company has too many minority hires now. It's losing its professionalism. Black people are only fit for security or janitorial work." The other chuckled, patting his friend's shoulder. "Yeah, true enough. Look at that." Their eyes fell directly on Aaliyah. She remembered the mop heavy in her hands, her legs itching to flee, yet forcing herself to stand still. Another time, a young female manager, after a meeting, tossed a half-empty coffee cup onto the table, the stain spreading wide, then turned to her. "Clean it up. That's your job. And this table, it's not a table for someone like you to sit at." Each sentence pierced Aaliyah's memory like a blade. 3 years. 3 years invisible. 3 years of listening, seeing, remembering. Aaliyah had learned to stay silent, to shrink herself until she was unnoticed. But in that silence, she heard everything, the secret conversations, the boasts about contracts, the open prejudices. Especially from Victoria Hayes. Victoria was the symbol of female power at Sterling. Blonde hair, sharp edges, words like knives. To many, she was a general who kept partners wary. But to Aaliyah, she was the shadow cast across every hallway. Once Aaliyah had overheard her in the women's restroom, believing herself alone. Victoria's voice whispered into the phone, "As I will never let a black person sit in the executive boardroom. It's laughable to think they could represent Sterling and Co." Aaliyah had left in silence, her chest tight. From then on, she began to remember everything. Every forgotten document on a desk, she glanced at it. Every half-open email on a screen, she memorized. Every seemingly trivial conversation she carved into memory. No one noticed her. Her invisibility became her eyes. Today, when Victoria publicly humiliated her in front of the Japanese delegation, those old wounds ripped open. They flared like 1,000 needles stabbing her memory. She sat alone in the empty boardroom, watching the late sunlight filter through the glass, spilling onto the wooden floor. The shoe prints of the delegation were still visible on its surface. In that moment, she whispered to herself, "Enough!" No longer the girl silently enduring, no longer the faded shadow pushing a cart. She had endured too long, and everything she had witnessed, every secret she had held, now became a weapon. On her way back to her small Brooklyn apartment, Aaliyah quietly opened her phone. In a hidden folder lay dozens of photos of forgotten documents, hundreds of detailed notes, even recordings she had stumbled upon while cleaning offices on weekends. One contained Victoria's voice, crystal clear. "We need to screen applications more carefully. Any names that sound too ethnic should be discarded. This company doesn't need those kinds of people tarnishing its image." Aaliyah replayed it, her fingers trembling, each word a spark. She knew that if brought to light, Sterling and Company would be shaken. And Victoria, the woman who had humiliated her before international partners, would pay the price. But Aaliyah also knew timing was everything. That night, just as she set her bag down on the small kitchen table, her phone buzzed. A message in Japanese characters appeared. Her heart raced as she read, "Carter-san, I would like to meet you privately. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Mandarin Cafe, 42nd Street. I have a special proposal. Takahashi." Aaliyah sank into her chair. The message coursed through her like an electric current. Today she had been mocked, shamed, dismissed. Yet at this very moment, the head of the Japanese delegation, who had looked her in the eyes with rare respect, wanted to meet her alone. An opportunity? Or another test? She looked down at her hands, roughened by cleaning chemicals, then at the notebook full of scribbled words. She recalled her mother's advice. "Patience, Aaliyah. Your silence is not weakness. It is preparation." Yes, for 3 years, silence had been her preparation. To see Sterling and Co. more clearly than anyone else. Aaliyah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Tomorrow she would step into that meeting, not as an invisible janitor, but as someone carrying the truth in her hands. And from that moment, she knew her journey was about to turn in a completely different direction. The next morning, New York lay under a heavy sky, grey clouds coiling as though ready to break into rain. On 42nd Street, traffic surged, yellow taxis in endless rows, horns blaring, footsteps striking the pavement in hurried rhythm. Amid the rush, Mandarin Cafe appeared modest, its dark wooden door and small gold-etched sign exuding the warm scent of roasted coffee, mingled with the aroma of green tea. Aaliyah paused before the entrance. The faded blue janitor's uniform was left behind in her Brooklyn apartment. Today she wore a simple navy dress that she had borrowed from a friend at the boarding house. Her hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck, nothing elaborate, but her dark eyes gleamed with a rare, unwavering light. She stepped inside. The room glowed warmly, with soft yellow lamps casting a reflection against the brick walls. At a corner table sat Mr. Takahashi, and beside him a graceful Chinese woman who introduced herself as Lisa Wong, Vice President of International Development. "Aaliyah-san," Takahashi rose and bowed respectfully. For the first time in years, Aaliyah felt genuine reverence directed at her, something she had never once received inside Sterling and Colo. She bowed slightly in return, speaking in Japanese. "It is an honor to meet you again, sir." They sat. A cup of tea was placed before her, the fragrance of jasmine drifting softly upward. Lisa Wong smiled, her gaze direct. "Yesterday we observed not only your translation skills, we also observed how you remained calm in the face of public humiliation. Few people could do that. Aaliyah stayed silent. The words public humiliation stung deeply, but she held her composed smile. Takahashi leaned forward, his Japanese slow and deliberate. Sterling and Kotu has been our long-standing partner. However, we have noticed many irregularities in how they conduct their business. We need someone who understands both worlds, America and Asia. And we believe that person is you. Aaliyah froze. But I'm only a janitor. I've never... Lisa cut in firmly. You are not just a janitor. 3 years of silent work there, and you've seen more than any executive. We know you are not ordinary. We want to propose that you become a bridge for our investment projects in America. Aaliyah tightened her grip on the teacup. She thought of the files, the recordings, the photographs she had quietly gathered the night before. So many times she had wondered if it was meaningless, just a habit of self-defense. But now those fragments had become evidence. She asked quietly, "And if I told you I had proof of misconduct inside Sterling & Co., what would you say?" Takahashi's eyes lit up. He set down his cup, tilting his head slightly. "I would say, God sent you at the right time." Lisa reached into her bag, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside was a business card reading, Carter & Associates, International Consulting Partner, along with a starting salary 5 times what she had earned in 3 years of janitorial work. Aaliyah stared at the card, her hand trembling. She saw her mother's image, the woman who had spent nights awake in the hospital, telling her, "Patience is not weakness, my daughter. It is the strength of those who know how to wait for the right moment." She folded the card, tucked it into her pocket, and said calmly, "I will think about it. But I have one question. Why trust me?" Takahashi smiled, the corners of his eyes etched with lines. "Because only those who have been invisible truly understand where real power lies. Yesterday you proved that." Leaving Mandarin Cafe, Aaliyah stepped back into the street. The wind whipped cold against her face, but her chest burned hot. She knew her life had just taken a new course. But she also knew the road ahead would hold not only opportunity, but trials. Victoria would never easily accept a black janitor rising to stand beside her. Sterling & Company was a fortress of power, and anyone who threatened it would be crushed. Walking down the street, Aaliyah recalled every time Victoria had called her the cleaning girl, every scornful glance from colleagues. Each wound now hardened into fuel. She whispered, like a vow to herself, "For 3 years I watched in silence. Now it's time I step out of the shadows." Above, a fine drizzle began to fall. But within Aaliyah, a flame had been lit, the flame of justice, of quiet preparation, and of a future she had never dared to dream. The following morning, Sterling & Company gleamed as always. Metal-plated elevators slid up and down without pause, carrying men and women in crisp suits to the upper floors of power. No one paid attention to the black janitor who roamed the halls each day. Until the whispers began about the meeting with the Japanese delegation. The rumor spread like fire. "I heard Sterling was crazy enough to let a cleaning girl sit at the negotiation table." Impossible. The Japanese must have been shocked. Right. And wasn't she black? Aaliyah heard every word, each syllable pricking like thorns. Yet she kept walking, her cart rolling smoothly across the marble floors. To them, she was just a shadow passing by. At precisely 10 a.m., the main boardroom filled with the entire leadership team. On the screen, a message from the Japanese delegation appeared. Request to reconsider the agreement. Several elements require further evaluation. Diplomatic phrasing. But to Richard Sterling, it meant one thing: the deal was in jeopardy. The atmosphere was taut as a wire. Executives sat upright, flipping through documents, yet their eyes kept drifting toward one corner, where Aaliyah stood, half hidden. And then, as though she had been waiting for this moment, Victoria Hayes rose to speak. "Gentlemen of the board," she began, her crimson dress seeming to devour the light in the room, We are paying the price for a reckless decision. I warned you. Allowing a black cleaning girl to sit in on a $300 million negotiation. It is a disgrace. Her words rang sharp, cold. A few heads nodded, others stayed silent, but none objected. Victoria stepped closer to Aaliyah, stopping deliberately in front of her. A thin smile curved on her lips. You should know your place. Scrubbing floors and cleaning toilets, that is your job. The Japanese don't need the presence of a black girl at an international negotiation table. They need professionalism, not pity. The room was crowded, yet utterly still. Every gaze fastened onto Aaliyah. Some looked away in discomfort, others stared with curiosity, and a few seemed to savor the spectacle of her humiliation. In that moment, Aaliyah felt the weight of isolation, alone, adrift in a sea of people. But she did not bow her head. Her eyes locked onto Victoria's, steady and unshaken. Her voice was low, but carried clearly through the room. Mrs. Hayes, I know exactly where my place is, and it is precisely from that place that, for 3 years, I have seen and heard more than anyone else here. Victoria faltered for a beat. Then she burst out laughing, turning to the others. Did you hear that? She thinks scrubbing floors is a strategic position. Good God, has anyone ever heard something so absurd? Laughter rippled across the table. A few executives even slapped their hands on the table in amusement. But in the corner, Richard Sterling remained silent, eyes narrowed. He remembered the day before, the fluency, the composure, the authority with which Aaliyah had carried herself before the Japanese. That had not been a joke. Aaliyah did not argue. She folded her small notebook gently, as though closing a chapter. Then she turned, padding out of the boardroom, leaving behind the echo of mocking laughter bouncing off the glass walls. That afternoon, the 48th floor hallway swelled with chatter. News from the meeting had spread. Victoria humiliated the janitor in front of the entire board. Curious eyes followed Aaliyah as she pushed her cart down the corridor. Some shook their heads in pity, others whispered derisively. A young female employee murmured to a colleague, "She's brave but foolish. Crossing Victoria only ends one way." Aaliyah heard it all, but instead of bowing, she straightened her back and kept walking. Inside her, a voice rose, "Enough. They want to turn you into a joke. But you know the truth, and truth will never stay silent forever." That evening, back in her cramped Brooklyn apartment, her mother sat at the small table, frail hands cupping a teacup. She looked at her daughter's somber face and asked softly, "Another incident at work?" Aaliyah nodded, tears welling, though she fought them back. "They humiliated me, Mama, in front of everyone. They said I belong only on the floor, that I'll never have a place in their world." Angela set her cup down and clasped her daughter's hand. Her grip trembled, but her voice was steady, firm. "My child, do you know why they fear you? Because you have what they never will. The eyes of someone who sees through them, the memory of someone who has observed in silence. People only humiliate when they are afraid." Tears blurred Aaliyah's vision. Her mother was right. The sharper Victoria's mockery, the deeper her fear. Aaliyah rose and went to the small desk. She opened her laptop. On the screen, a hidden folder appeared. Sterling irregularities. Inside lay dozens of files, emails, photographs, and recordings. Each one was a piece of evidence she had gathered silently over the course of 3 years. She sat in stillness for a long time, then she whispered to herself, "The days of silence are over." The next morning, Victoria entered the company, her face radiant. The rumor of her public shaming of the janitor had already swept through every floor. To her, it was a triumph, proof of her dominance. But as she strode down the hallway, Richard Sterling's eyes followed coldly. In his mind, Aaliyah's words echoed. "For 3 years, I have seen and heard more than anyone else here." He didn't know precisely what the girl held, but instinct told him the power game at Sterling & Co. had just shifted. And Victoria, in her moment of smug victory, had no idea. She had just lit the fuse of a storm. The next day, New York lay under a grey sky. A thin drizzle veiled the gleaming glass towers of the financial district. Inside Sterling and Company, the 48th floor corridor shone brightly, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with the smell of expensive perfume. But the atmosphere was different. Tense, expectant, as though everyone sensed a storm approaching. Aaliyah pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway. Eyes followed her. Some shook their heads in pity, others smirked. The story of her humiliation at the hands of Victoria had already spread through the company. To most, Aaliyah was nothing but a joke, a reminder of the limits imposed on a black woman in the world of finance. Yet no one knew that inside the small pouch at her side, Aaliyah carried a USB drive, a single device holding 3 years of silence transformed into evidence. The emergency meeting was convened that afternoon. The board of directors, CEO Richard Sterling, and, of course, Victoria Hayes. At the far end of the table, Aaliyah entered with a composure that startled even herself. The blue janitor's uniform was gone. She wore a plain grey suit borrowed from a friend, simple yet fitting. The eyes on her were a mix: surprise, skepticism, disdain, but Aaliyah paid them no mind. She took her seat, placing her laptop and the USB on the table. Richard spoke first, voice taut but steady. "We are meeting today because the Japanese delegation has filed a complaint regarding irregularities in the contract. They also requested clarification on the personnel present during yesterday's translation, and they specifically asked for Ms. Carter to be here." Victoria gave a bitter laugh, her tone cutting. Pathetic. A billion-dollar corporation now letting its fate rest in the hands of a janitor. The air grew heavy. Richard turned to Aaliyah, giving a slight nod. "Carter, what do you have to present?" Aaliyah drew a deep breath. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, for 3 years I have been here, cleaning boardrooms, wiping tables, taking out trash. Invisible to all of you. But it is precisely that invisibility that allowed me to witness things no one else expected." The room stirred. Victoria crossed her arms, sneering. "Oh, let's see what the cleaning girl claims to have witnessed." Aaliyah didn't answer. She plugged the USB into her laptop, connecting it to the large screen. Within seconds, an email appeared with the subject line, "Confidential, do not forward." Her voice remained steady. "This is an email Mrs. Hayes sent to Mills Corporation 6 months ago. In it, she disclosed confidential bidding information from our competitor, Johnson Capital. This is a direct violation of federal antitrust law." One director's eyes widened. "My God," Victoria snapped, her voice rising. "Fabricated. Do you think anyone will believe a black cleaning girl?" Unmoved, Aaliyah switched to the second document, a quarterly report with crude alterations. And here, the latest quarterly statement. Mrs. Hayes deliberately inflated the costs of projects led by employees of color, making them appear as financial failures. This allowed her to terminate those projects and shift the blame onto them. A wave of outrage swept through the room. A Latino director muttered under his breath, "I knew something wasn't right." Victoria's face paled, but she clung to her arrogance. "You're just making this up for revenge. No one will believe a janitor." Aaliyah lifted her head, her dark eyes glowing with quiet resolve. "Then what about this recording, captured by the security system 8 months ago?" The speakers filled the room with Victoria's voice, cold and precise. "We cannot let those people think they deserve a seat in the boardroom. Keeping this company clean means no black faces at this table." Gasps rippled. Faces stiffened in shock. A few shook their heads in disgust. Victoria's complexion drained, her voice cracked. That was taken out of context. You don't understand the pressure I was under." Richard slammed his hand on the table, his voice like a hammer. "Enough, Victoria." The room fell silent. Aaliyah closed her laptop gently, her voice soft yet cutting as a blade. For 3 years, I scrubbed every boardroom table, overheard every conversation, saw every number twisted. They called me the cleaning girl. But from that floor, I saw everything they tried to hide at the top. No one spoke. Several directors turned to Richard, waiting. Sterling leaned back in his chair, his eyes heavy, his face aged a decade in minutes. Then he turned slowly to Victoria. "You have 30 seconds to explain why I should not fire you right now and send this file to the federal investigators." Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came. Sweat trickled down her forehead, smearing her makeup. Her eyes darted around, searching for an ally, but found only cold, contemptuous stares. Aaliyah sat tall, silent. No gloating, no triumph, just silence. Silence that thundered louder than any shout. And in that moment, everyone understood. The balance of power had shifted. The meeting ended in chaos. Victoria stumbled out, her heels clattering against the floor, her face ghostly pale. Security was ordered to escort her to the lobby. When the doors closed, Aaliyah remained in her seat. Murmurs filled the room, but the eyes on her now carried something new. Not mockery, but respect. Richard Sterling approached quietly, his voice low. "Carter, you just saved this company." Aaliyah looked out the glass window, where rain blurred Manhattan's skyline. Her voice was soft as wind, but every word struck hard. "No, sir. I only brought the truth into the light. This company will either save itself or destroy itself, depending on how it treats the truth." That evening, Aaliyah sat in her dimly lit apartment, the yellow lamp casting a warm glow. Her mother listened as she recounted everything. At the mention of the recording, Angela shuddered, clutching her daughter's hand. "How long have you endured this?" Aaliyah smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Long enough to turn it into strength." She felt no triumph, no victory cry, only release. 3 years of silence had finally spoken. And she knew. This was only the beginning. New York glittered at night, skyscrapers cloaked in light. But inside the small apartment in Brooklyn, Aaliyah sat in silence. The room was still, filled only with the ticking of a clock and the faint, labored breaths of her mother in the bedroom. Before her sat the old laptop, its pale blue screen casting a glow across her contemplative face. On the screen, the folder named Sterling Irregularities lay open. Each file like a sharpened blade, emails inflating costs to eliminate projects led by employees of color. Photos of bid sheets were deliberately leaked to Victoria's favored partners. Recordings of conversations laced with prejudice. "We can't have names that sound too Latino or African showing up on the promotion list." 3 years of invisibility had given her ears and eyes that no one ever suspected. And now all the evidence lay in her hands. Aaliyah closed her eyes. Memories rushed back, mocking laughter in the boardroom, the sneer that polished coal is still just coal, the cold stares that treated her like nothing. All of it had become fuel, melting pain into power. She whispered to herself. Silence has lasted long enough. Her phone buzzed. A text message appeared, written in familiar Japanese characters. "Carter-san, we must meet again tomorrow. There is something important regarding Sterling and Comey, Takahashi." Aaliyah's heart pounded. The next morning she stepped once more into Mandarin Cafe. Takahashi and Lisa Wong were already waiting. The air today was heavier, as though what they were about to say would change everything. Lisa spoke first, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Sterling and Coty has problems beyond Victoria. We've received reports that in at least 3 recent contracts, the company used sabotage to eliminate competitors, most of them businesses led by people of color." Aaliyah sat upright, her chest tightening. She remembered the Latino employee fired after a project inexplicably failed. The brilliant black engineer quietly cut from the promotion list because he was deemed not the right image for the company. So it was all orchestrated. Takahashi continued, his voice measured. "We need the truth, and we believe only you hold that truth. Aaliyah inhaled deeply. Then she opened her laptop, showing them a file dozens of pages long. Inside, every email, every recording, every image laid bare the discrimination and corruption. Lisa flipped through each page, her face darkening. My God, if this comes to light, it won't just take down Victoria. Sterling and Kobe itself will tremble. The room fell into silence. Aaliyah looked straight at them, her voice low but resolute. I don't want to bring down just one person. I want to change the way they see people like me. If exposure doesn't create a new opportunity, then it means nothing. Takahashi nodded, admiration flickering in his eyes. You are not seeking revenge. You are seeking justice. When she returned to Sterling that afternoon, she could feel eyes trailing her. Rumors of the exposure meeting had swept through every floor. Whispers floated past her. What does she have in her hands? They say she's holding evidence, but who would believe a janitor could keep something that important? Victoria, however, was different. Though suspended, she appeared in the corridor, her face still defiant. As she passed Aaliyah, she leaned in, her voice dripping venom. Don't think a few cheap emails can bring me down. This empire won't crumble because of a black cleaning girl. Sooner or later, they'll throw you out too. Aaliyah didn't answer, but her eyes no longer carried the look of someone enduring. They were calm and steady, like the darkness before a storm. That night, back in her apartment, she reopened the evidence folder. The more she looked, the clearer it became. Sterling and Company was not just a financial firm. It was the embodiment of a system, one where skin color decided opportunity and power concealed injustice. She knew the battle ahead would not be easy, but she also knew 3 years of invisibility had prepared her for every step. Sitting in the small room, yellow light washing over her, Aaliyah wrote in her worn notebook, "Tomorrow the darkness begins to speak." And from that moment, she was no longer a silent janitor. She was the keeper of secrets, the one holding the fuse that could shake the very foundation of Sterling & Co. That morning, the 48th floor of Sterling & Company buzzed with unusual chaos. Financial news outlets began leaking reports. Japanese delegation delays contract signing, citing concerns over Sterling & Company's transparency. In the world of finance, a single word, concerns, was enough to shake investor confidence to its core. Richard Sterling held back-to-back meetings with his executives. His face looked hollow, his tie loosened, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. In the middle of this crisis, an unexpected proposition appeared. During a break, Aaliyah found a white envelope placed on the tiny janitor's desk, a spot no one ever noticed. There was no sender's name. She opened it and saw a card with a single short line. Mandarin Hotel, Suite 1503. 8 p.m. tonight. An opportunity you should not miss. No signature, but the slanted, familiar handwriting told her everything. Victoria Hayes. Aaliyah's heart sank a beat. She understood. The same woman who had humiliated her now extended an invitation. In this world, that wasn't goodwill. It was a calculated move. 8 p.m. Suite 1503 of the Mandarin Hotel glowed softly under amber light. Victoria stood waiting, draped in an elegant black dress, a glass of red wine in her hand. She still looked powerful, but her eyes betrayed unease. Aaliyah stepped in. She wore a plain white blouse, simple trousers, and her hair neatly tied back. No makeup, no disguise, just herself, but with a calmness in her gaze that unsettled Victoria. "You came," Victoria said, striving for authority. "Sit, we need to talk." Aaliyah said nothing, taking her seat. Victoria swirled her wine, speaking slowly. "You think you have the upper hand, but hear me clearly, you cannot beat this system. A few emails, a few recordings, all they prove is that you're reckless. You will lose everything. And me? I will rise again. I always do." She leaned back, a cold smile curling her lips. "But I can help you. I can give you enough money to care for your mother for the rest of her life. All you need to do is disappear. Go back to cleaning floors, or quit, live quietly. Don't dream of sitting at the executive table. There is no place for a black girl like you there. The last words fell heavy, like a sentence pronounced. Aaliyah sat motionless. No reaction, no anger, only the faintest tremor in her hand, then stillness. She looked directly at Victoria, her voice low but unwavering. "Mrs. Hayes, I've heard you say this too many times. Black people have no place. People with low incomes have no chance. People like me don't belong at the table. But do you know something? It's precisely because we are looked down on that I can see clearly what you and this system are trying to hide." Victoria's brows tightened. Aaliyah continued, "You want me gone? No, I will stay. I will stay until the truth leaves you, and those like you unable to lift your heads in any room again." Silence, heavy. Then Victoria laughed, high and hollow. "Naive, you think you can topple a fortress. You might win one battle, but this system, it will crush you." Aaliyah tilted her head slightly, her eyes calm as stone. "The system is only strong when we stay silent. I was silent for 3 years, no longer." The answer erased the smile from Victoria's lip. When Aaliyah left the hotel, cold wind swept the streets, tumbling golden leaves across the pavement. She knew Victoria would strike back. That woman never accepted defeat, but she also knew she was no longer afraid. In her pocket, her phone vibrated. A message from Lisa Wong. "Carter, prepare yourself tomorrow. The Japanese delegation will file an official request demanding that Sterling and Company explain its acts of discrimination and fraud. They want you present." Aaliyah stopped in the middle of the street, lifting her gaze toward the Sterling and Company tower blazing against the night sky. Victoria Hayes had just played her final threat. And tomorrow, the whole truth would begin to rise. That morning, the New York sky hung gray, wind whistling against the glass towers of Sterling and Co. The entire corporation was in turmoil. Financial headlines blared in bold print. Japanese delegation demands Sterling and Company clarify $300 million contract. Allegations of racism and fraud emerge. In a single night, Sterling and Company's stock had plunged nearly 12%. Investors flooded the phone lines, and partner banks froze transactions. For Richard Sterling, this was the worst storm of his career. He summoned the entire board of directors. The 48th floor boardroom gleamed brightly, a long wooden table buried under stacks of documents, screens flashing red reports. The air was thick and heavy, so silent that one could hear the ragged breaths of every person present. At the far end, the doors opened. Aaliyah entered. No faded janitor's uniform now. She wore a tailored grey suit and a white blouse, her hair tied neatly back. In her hand was a laptop. Her walk was composed and unhurried. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Some doubtful, some contemptuous, but others curious, even expectant. For they all knew the Japanese had specifically requested her presence. Richard Sterling nodded, motioning her to sit. Across the table, Victoria Hayes was already present. Though suspended, she still wore a commanding red dress, her lipstick sharp, her eyes glittering with defiance. "Let us begin," Richard rasped, his voice hoarse. "Sterling and Cody faces a crisis. The Japanese delegation has officially demanded an investigation, and Ms. Carter is here at their request." Victoria laughed coldly, her voice slicing through the room. "The circus continues. A black cleaning girl at the board table. This is a disgrace to the company." The room was taut as wire, yet Aaliyah did not answer. She opened her laptop and connected it to the large screen. In the sterile glow, the files appeared. Her voice was steady, resonant. "For 3 years, I was invisible to all of you, but it was that invisibility that allowed me to hear and see what no one expected. Today, I will show you the truth." The first slide appeared, an email from Victoria to a partner, leaking confidential bid information from a black-owned firm. Proof of corporate espionage. The second slide, doctored expense reports, deliberately inflated to make projects led by employees of color appear as financial failures. The third, an audio recording of Victoria's voice, every word clear. We cannot let them believe they deserve a seat at the board. Keeping this company clean means no black people sitting as equals. Noise erupted. An elderly director slammed his hand on the table. My God, this is undeniable proof of racism and fraud. Victoria leapt up, face drained, her voice shrill. Forged. She fabricated everything. What right does a cleaning girl have to? Aaliyah cut her off, her voice quiet but razor sharp. No right as a cleaning girl. Or is it precisely because I was invisible that I saw the truth you tried to hide? The room fell silent. A Latino director, long silent for years, rose to his feet, voice trembling. I've watched colleagues of color passed over for promotions without reason. Today, I finally understand why. This discrimination destroyed them. A white female director nodded, her expression grave. We cannot ignore this. If it reaches the public, the company will face federal investigation. Richard Sterling sat motionless. His gaze lingered on Aaliyah, and for the first time, he saw in her a calm authority, a power that even seasoned directors rarely commanded. Aaliyah concluded with words that struck like steel. They called me coal, saying no matter how polished, it would still be coal. But from that floor, I saw every crack in this system. And today I bring light into them. Victoria nearly screamed, eyes wild. You cannot believe her. This is a conspiracy, all lies. But no one came to her defense. Eyes turned away, cold, detached. Richard's hand slammed the table. Enough, Victoria. As of this moment, you are stripped of all authority. This file will be forwarded to federal investigators. Security, escort her out. The staccato of Victoria's heels echoed down the corridor, like the last frantic wings of a fallen bird. In the boardroom, silence lingered. Then, slowly, one director stood, facing Aaliyah. Carter, you endured 3 years, silent yet watchful. Today, you not only saved this company from collapse, you gave us an example. Applause broke out, not loud but steady, echoing through the glass walls. Aaliyah sat still, eyes glistening, her hand resting on the old notebook, the same one she once used to log cleaning hours. Richard Sterling looked at her for a long moment, then spoke in a low, solemn voice. Carter, you have proven yourself worthy of this table. From today, you will serve as Director of International Relations. The room froze. Then slowly, heads began to nod. This time, no one objected. Aaliyah drew in a long breath. In that moment, every insult, every scornful glance, every invisible day coalesced into a weight that lifted her taller than ever before. She said nothing more, only smiled faintly, whispering inside, Mama, at last I've stepped out of the shadows. Outside, the New York sky remained grey. But inside this room, a new chapter had begun. Not only for Aaliyah, but for Sterling and Company. A week later, Sterling and Company felt like an entirely different world. The hallways that once echoed with mocking laughter were now filled with whispers of awe. People spoke of the black woman who had spent 3 silent years scrubbing floors and then, in a single day, shook the entire system. They no longer looked at Aaliyah Carter with pity or scorn. Now, when she walked by, they lifted their heads in greeting, as though a new star had risen from the darkest place. In her new office, a modest glass-walled room on the 38th floor overlooking Manhattan's glowing skyline, Aaliyah sat at her desk. Not the grand walnut tables of veteran directors, but a sleek, simple desk stacked with international partnership files. On that desk, beside her laptop and phone, rested one small object, the worn brown notebook. Its pages still bore faint ink marks, the hours she once logged for cleaning shifts, schedules for changing flowers, hurried notes from conversations Victoria thought no one heard. Aaliyah looked at the notebook, sighed, then smiled softly. The notebook of an invisible woman. now proof that had brought her into the light. The day of her official appointment, the 48th floor boardroom was packed. Reporters swarmed the lobby, cameras sweeping the hall. Richard Sterling sat at the head chair, his expression stern but his eyes unusually warm as he looked at Aaliyah, standing before the board. His voice was solemn. Today, we are not only announcing a new director of international relations, we are announcing a change in this company's culture. Sterling & Company will no longer be a place where skin color determines worth, or where quiet voices are silenced. Carter has shown us, sometimes, the greatest value comes from where we least expect it. Thunderous applause erupted. For Aaliyah, the sound was like hammers breaking through the walls of silence that had confined her for years. She rose, speaking slowly but firmly. I never imagined I would stand here one day. For 3 years, I was the only one cleaning these halls. I heard the insults, the mocking laughter. They called me black coal, saying no matter how polished, I would remain coal. But from that place, I saw what they didn't want anyone to see. Today, I am not here for revenge. I am here for justice, and justice, to me, means no one else should have to live in the silence I once endured. The room fell silent for a breath, then burst into long, heartfelt applause. And Victoria Hayes. As Aaliyah stepped into the light, Victoria fell into the shadows. Financial media splashed the headlines, Sterling executive under investigation for fraud and racial discrimination. She lost her luxury Manhattan apartment and was forced to move into a small rental in Queens. Job applications were rejected, one after another. No corporation dared touch her tainted name. Each morning, she stared into the mirror, seeing a woman who had aged a decade in a matter of months. Once feared by employees, she had become a symbol of arrogance brought low. One night, as she turned on the TV, Victoria saw Aaliyah smiling confidently on Business Weekly under the headline, From Janitor to Director, the Black Woman Who Changed Sterling & Co. Her eyes blurred. For the first time in months, what pierced her was not anger, but regret. 6 months later, Sterling & Co. revived, signing new international deals. Asian partners, once hesitant, now placed renewed trust, partly because they knew a 26-year-old black woman, once a janitor, now sat as director of international relations. The story spread, not as a PR stunt, but as a reminder, talent has no color. Aaliyah did more than work. She launched a project called Second Voice, a scholarship fund for students of color who have been forced to abandon school due to financial hardship. At the launch ceremony at Columbia University, she took the podium, the very place she had once left in shame. Her voice carried across an audience of 500 students. No one should have to choose between caring for family and pursuing their dreams. I once lost my chance, but you will not. The Second Voice Fund will be a second doorway for those whose voices were once silenced. Tears streamed from many eyes. They looked at her, someone who had once been in their very place, and believed their dreams were still alive. That evening, back in her modest but now refurbished apartment, Aaliyah called her mother. On the screen, Angela's face appeared healthier after treatment. She smiled. "My daughter, I watched your speech today. You have done what I always believed you were meant to do." Aaliyah smiled back, eyes glistening. "Mama, my 3 years of silence were not weakness. I was silent to learn how to see. And today I spoke for those who cannot speak." Angela nodded, her eyes shining. "You have turned pain into strength. That is the only way to win." Late at night, Aaliyah stood by the window, gazing over Manhattan. The city that once rendered her invisible now welcomed her as a living witness to justice. But she felt no triumph, only stillness, like a river after a storm, clear and deep. She remembered every lash of mockery, every contemptuous look, every bowed head of silence. All had become stepping stones, lifting her to stand taller, prouder. And in that moment, she silently repeated the words once scribbled into her old notebook. Silence is preparation, and preparation at the right moment becomes power. 1 year later, Aaliyah appeared on the cover of Forbes, the 26-year-old black woman redefining power in American finance. In the interview, when asked about Victoria Hayes, she smiled and replied, "She gave me the greatest gift. She showed me exactly who I never want to become." The article ended with a single line that left millions of readers hushed. "They called me a cleaning girl, but from that floor I saw what they tried to hide. And from there I stood up."